Thank you. It's lovely to be here. And it was so lovely watching all the people introduce themselves. So, hello, everybody. So, I'm going to do a session for you on eco anxiety to eco aliveness and talk about the importance of feelings first. So, we're going to go on a journey from anxiety to aliveness. But really importantly, I have to introduce you to the other beating heart in the room first. So this is Murphy. And he's a sweet old boy, and I live in a very small cottage. So he's not going to get locked in the kitchen because I'd get nothing but droopy ears for the rest of the evening. He'd think he'd done something terribly wrong. So he's sitting right next to me. But he is 13 in dog years, which is 90 something in human years. So he falls asleep, he snores, he coughs, he joins in. Don't worry if you hear strange noises behind me. It's Murphy joining in. I usually make the joke that he's heard all of this before. So there he is. That was him in his prime. So that was to lull you into a false sense of security that this wasn't going to be a tricky thing to be listening to. Just remember the smiling dog when I tell you that we're living in this time when tragedy, which is without precedent, is unfolding in front of our eyes. We're witnessing catastrophic rates of species extinction, biodiversity loss, soil and ocean exhaustion, and runaway climate change. It's a quote from Paul Hoggett, who set up the Climate Psychology Alliance. So, it's going to be feeling pretty terrible, right? And there are key words in this, that this is unfolding in front of our eyes. We're witnessing something. So this is a very lived experience of engaging with the climate and biodiversity crisis. This is not separate from us. We're embodying this. We're part of this. And so we're going to be having feelings around this. So how bad is this? How big is this? Well, it's pretty big. So we've got a little bit of COVID down in the bottom left-hand corner, which I'm not underestimating its seriousness. I'm not minimizing it. It is a global tragedy. But in the scale of things, with climate change and biodiversity crisis looming up there, it is still much smaller. It's a global pandemic. So how can I be sitting here and saying this global pandemic is smaller than everything else? You know, that's about scale, that's about perspective. And that's how bad this is. And it's also how urgent this is. However, it's not just bad. The size of the crisis, the size of the drama, the size of the tragedy that we're engaging with can also be matched by the size of the opportunities for creative potential change. So we can match that if we can stretch down into our humanity deeply enough and widely enough and globally enough. So how's this going to feel? Well, here's a short list of how it might be feeling. We're going to be feeling anxiety, and as Renee said, this is eco-anxiety. This is specifically connected to the planet, to the world around us. This is nothing new, but it's now coming massively into public consciousness. But anxiety is the gateway. And I don't mind anything. Some people don't like the term eco-anxiety. I quite like it. Because, you know, between you and me, I like anything that gets us talking about feelings, right? So anxiety is just fine with me. But it leads into sadness, depression, grief, hope and hopelessness, anger and blame, frustration, guilt. And then where are we going to go with this? Well, we're going to have fantasies of rescue and apocalyptic, catastrophic fantasies. And of course, avoidance and ambivalence is going to be in the mix, and nihilism and despair, and a little bit of denial, well, understandably, because this is an overwhelming mix of feelings. I'd be slightly worried about people that weren't feeling a fair range of these at the moment, because I think you're either living under a rock or living on another planet or in utter denial if you're not having complex emotional responses to what's going on here. But this is here just to say, and it's worth coming on this journey. It's worth coming on this feeling journey to engage with the climate and biodiversity crisis. We've had technological solutions for decades, and fail to act. Why? Well, we need to be joining up the emotional side of these things. We need to be engaging our hearts and our souls, as well as our thinking and as well as technological solutions. So this curve can really help show the need not just to go through the anxiety and the fear, but down into those more shadowy, sticky, tricky feelings that understandably lots of humans want to avoid, myself included, of guilt and depression and despair. It's understandable, but you can see the exits, you can see the ways out into denial or into hostility. They're just going to take you around in a vicious circle and not going to get you anywhere. We can see the attempt to escape into disillusionment. That's not going to help us either. So the trick here is take the brake off, go on the ride, go to the bottom of the wave, and engage with these feelings of despair. Because paradoxically, that's where it gets transformative. Because what brings us through that despair is grief. And that moves us into acceptance. This is where we're at. Yeah, it's pretty bad. And there's things we can do about it. And that will enable us to move forwards. It's a transformative cycle. So it's not comfortable, but we have to be uncomfortable to start to deal with the reality of the crisis that we're facing. So feelings first. Why do I want us to put feelings first? Well, we're not just rational creatures, human beings. If we were just rational creatures, gosh, there'd be no war, there'd be no child abuse, and we probably wouldn't be in this mess that we're in with this, yeah? So cognition is important, of course, rational solutions are important, but we also need to go to feelings which will take us into symbolic, less rational, other rational, and meaning. I'm not advocating that we go to either or. We don't want to go to either or, either feelings or thinking or action. We really need to hold the tension, and we need to think about this as a both and. But feelings often precede thinking. And when you ask people about how you're feeling, they'll frequently tell you what they're thinking. So I really want us to get feelings up there first. Now, when I was training to be a diver, a scuba diver, one of the things that we were taught, this is Paddy, was when you're in trouble underwater, when you're trapped, when something's going wrong, when you're feeling anxious, there's a thing that you follow. And it was drummed into us when I was training, which was a good thing actually, because I was quite a nervous diver when I started out. And this was stop what you're doing and breathe, really handy when you're underwater, then think, and then act. And that stayed with me. By the way, I'm now a diving instructor, so clearly I managed to work my way through my anxieties. Actually, I was sobbing on the beach after my first lesson, which was hilarious. But I found a way through that. I'll tell you why, because I so wanted to go and be in that other world. And what I draw on all the time at the moment when it comes to the fear and the anxiety about negotiating this new world of the climate and biodiversity crisis, which we've got no map for, that's the sort of thing I come back to. That's the sort of thing that holds me through this. So I came up with a formula which mirrored the Paddy formula, but which I want to apply to the climate and biodiversity crisis. And this is feel, think, breathe, understand, and then act. Because this understanding sits between this thinking and feeling. That's what grounds us. That's what takes us forwards. And understanding is interesting because it gives us something to stand on. It gives us the ground under our feet. It helps us understand under the surface of things, and it helps us find meaning. So I want to take us now from the anxiety through compassion. And I always say to people, you're feeling anxious about the climate and biodiversity crisis. After I've empathized, I say, look, actually, this is a good thing because it shows you care. It shows you're alive. It shows you're awake to the suffering of the planet and the people and the species on this planet. So let's reframe eco-anxiety and talk about eco-understanding, eco-empathy, eco-compassion, eco-courage, eco-community. This is what we need to be transforming it into. It's a sort of alchemical shift, eco-awareness, eco-connection, eco-belonging, eco-meaning, eco-care, and then, of course, eco-aliveness, because the truth is, to live fully in the world means to also feel the anxiety that goes with the territory of being a vulnerable human being. And that's what engaging with all of this stuff emotionally does. It makes us vulnerable, and that vulnerability can bring us close to an empathetic understanding globally about the suffering of people and animals around the world. And I would not want to be without that. It may be uncomfortable, but it connects me. Without that, I don't really feel alive. My heart's not engaged. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.
You, Renee.
There's a lot to unpack there. So we will hopefully have time for getting into it a bit. Really struck by what you're doing is a very powerful reframe.
Mm.
You know, you're inviting us to reframe our relationship with anxiety.
Yeah.
You used the phrase gateway at the beginning of your talk, and now I'm hearing you say it's how we relate with our anxiety, you know, as what it means to be the experience of being a vulnerable human being, and our connectivity and relationship with life. I think questions that may arise have to do with how do we contain and manage the anxiety so it's not debilitating. I think a lot of us feel pretty scared about the idea. Anxiety is not a popular topic of, you know, if I go in and say, hey, we all need to embrace our anxiety. I think that that it's a very nuanced point that you're making. So
thank you, Renee. You're absolutely right. And I wouldn't be minimizing how uncomfortable it is at all. But I am being hopefully kindly, brutally, compassionately honest about the fact that we have no choice. And frankly, we have a choice between anxiety and depression. Depression is an under response and anxiety can be an over response. So it's about holding the tension between the two and stretching our hearts wide enough to be able to feel the edge of the anxiety and feel the sadness and grief and still stay functioning in the middle. I quite agree. People need support in order to do this. They need relationship, and they need community, and they need understanding. You're absolutely right, Renee. But I can't see what else we should be doing right now.
Well, I think an ideal scenario is that we support ourselves and each other in welcoming and relating with our experience, the messy, complicated feelings of anxiety and grief and so forth, in a way that allows us to move through it, you know, more productively, right? So if we can normalize these feelings, I think that's a really significant way forward, right?
Sure. Yeah, I agree. I would be slightly cautious about trying to move through it.
Okay. So maybe that's not. I know. I always tell people not to say that.
I think it's about being in it and allowing it. But I absolutely agree. We don't want this to overwhelm. But it's also what helps us feel alive. And that's why I wanted to take it to the aliveness. So what comes with that is joy and beauty and appreciation and love. So
yeah,
there's some without that we don't feel that good stuff. So you're right, it's about reframing, but I think it's also about integrating this and building that emotional resilience in each other and in our communities and in the world so that we can face what's unfolding.
That's right. Well, thankfully we have someone who wrote a book called Emotional Resilience in the Era of Climate Change who's coming up soon. So yeah. 100% agree.